Welcome to the latest episode of the Lawyers Coach podcast. I'm Oliver Hansard, and I'm delighted to be here with my co-host Claire Race. And Claire, how are you doing?
So I'm doing really well. I have been talking to Lexi Segal, who is in-house at BT. The episode was an interesting one for me because you might notice the sound quality is a little different from normal because I actually recorded whilst I was away in South America. So that was amazing. And Lexi's conversation was amazing.
So what topics did you cover when you spoke to Lexi?
So we spoke a little bit about innovation and about technology, as to be expected with BT. But we spent a lot of time thinking about DEI, which is something that BT is really heavily involved in as a client. But Lexi in particular has had a really key role in managing what BT are doing with their panel firms.
Brilliant stuff. So let's press play.
Well, let's start with the question that we always ask all of our guests, which is, what made you become a lawyer?
God, I wanted to be a lawyer since I was really young. I was one of those kids who decided at sort of 13, 14 years old, that's it, I'm going to be a lawyer, even though I wasn't quite sure what a lawyer was or how I was going to get there. And I definitely didn't know how long I was going to have to study for. But the reason I wanted to be a lawyer was because we used to sit around our family dinner tables arguing and debating and having conversations. And I just really enjoyed that. I wanted to do that for my job. I wanted to debate and argue. And so, well, initially I wanted to be a barrister. I wanted to stand up in the courtroom and debate and argue points of law. Well, I didn't know it was points of law when I was 14, but generally debate and argue. But I didn't get a pupillage. So that led me to be a solicitor, a litigation solicitor initially. And then I moved to BT to do investigations, and then eventually moved into transactional work as well. But yeah, initially I just wanted a good fight.
And you said there, so you moved from kind of private practice to an in-house role. What was that transition like for you?
It wasn't a transition I was necessarily looking for or thought that I would like. I think there's this idea, and in honesty, it's a bit old school, so I don't want to label anyone with it today. But certainly when I was coming up through the ranks, there was this idea that in-house life was an easier life and sort of for people who couldn't make it in private practice. And I definitely had that view as a private practice lawyer. So I didn't really want an in-house life. I wanted to be tough. I was a tough, strong lawyer, and I could make it with the best of them. But the reality is as I became more senior, the work, I didn't find the work particularly appealing. I wanted to work somewhere where I felt that my efforts had some form of meaning, that I didn't just do cases and at the end of the case sort of hand it back, and win or lose really made no difference to anyone. I wanted to work somewhere where I felt there was meaning and purpose to my work. And I couldn't find that in private practice, in the type of litigation I was doing, which was big corporate commercial cases. So I decided to take some time out. 10 years in private practice will exhaust anyone. And I actually took a year out, but the initial plan was a 6-month sabbatical in New York, doing no law at all, but hanging out in New York, kickboxing and dancing, because those are my hobbies. I do Lindy Hop, essentially spending every night in a different jazz dive bar, listening to jazz and drinking, and just really having a proper time out. And then when I came back 6 months later to London, I started looking at what I wanted to do. And I realized if I was going to have a role that was going to have some form of meaning or purpose, I'd need to be in a business. I'd need to be somewhere where I could be at the table, I could be involved in the decision making and see the outcomes of those decisions and be part of implementing them. And so I looked for in-house roles. I was also looking for non-legal roles. I was looking for sort of a project management operations style role. I thought the skills were very transferable in terms of the type of thing I'd done, project managing big litigations. But I didn't find that role. The first role that came up was a role at BT to be their principal investigator. And I sold myself to them and they said yes, despite the fact that I wasn't an investigator, I was a litigator, but the skill set, again, is transferable. And that's how I ended up at BT. And yeah, I think now that I'm in-house, in hindsight, I just don't know why everyone doesn't move over to the dark side. It's brilliant. You don't get paid as much, but your work hours are way better. The work-life balance is better. The ability to have meaning in your work, to see things through. I found the people I work with to be much more collegiate. The atmosphere is brilliant. So I think that perhaps I was a bit scared of what it would look like, but it really is fantastic, and it also allows me to do a real mixture of things.
Let's talk about the diversity work that you do, because it was one of the
Sure.
things that connected us, and one of the reasons I was so keen to get you on the podcast. So BT, I think, have been one of the companies, certainly in the UK, that have really been kind of leading the way, I think, in kind of efforts to make firms sit up and take notice of this kind of topic being something that companies care about. And I know there's kind of a long track record in terms of various things that BT has signed, has been signatories to various things. But I think the big news, and I think it was around 2020, wasn't it, when you announced, because I remember it was kind of COVID sort of time, that you were going to automatically grant a place to the firm on your panel who had done the best, and you could probably articulate this better than I can, but had done the best in terms of making efforts in DEI. Obviously, fast forward now 4 years, 3 years, 4 years, and that has happened. And I understand that you've been quite pivotal in the process in terms of monitoring what firms have been doing. So I guess, first of all, if you can articulate that in the way that it should be articulated.
No, you did.
Tell us a little bit about what your role has been in all of that.
No, absolutely. And you articulated it brilliantly. Like, I'll just use different words and it will sound exactly the same. So I think you did a great job. But yes, you're correct. So, and I should say that I joined BT in February 2020, so 3 weeks before the pandemic started. BT had gone through an RFP process to retender its panel. It was appointing its new panel, and it made an announcement at that stage that it was going to offer an automatic place on its panel next time for the firm that I'm not going to get the wording exactly right. And it's also, let's say, not wording that we would necessarily use today, but I think it was something along the lines of female and BAME representation, so Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic. Of course, we don't use that acronym anymore. At the time, it was quite a popular one. And best overall representation for people who were female or who came from a Black, Asian, or minority ethnic background. And that was in 2020. Fast forward 2 years, shall we say, and the issue we had in BT was we wanted to offer this automatic place, but ultimately we didn't know how to judge it. Like, how do you judge overall representation? What does that look like? Do you look at the stats today of the law firms and say, okay, well, this law firm has 20% female presenting people in their partnership, and this law firm has 25% female presenting partnerships, so this law firm's doing better? Do you look at the journey that law firms have gone on? So one law firm may have increased its stats by 10%, and one law firm might have increased its stats from 2%. But how does that compare from when they started? Do you look at the makeup of the law firms and where they're located? So, for example, we have law firms on our panel whose headquarters are in Scotland, and in Scotland, particularly the makeup of people in terms of their ethnic and racial background is different to, let's say, a law firm in London. So how do you judge law firms who are headquartered in different places? How do you judge law firms that are huge and international against law firms that are national or even just based in one place? It's not easy. And we have all these law firms on BT's panel. So we had to come up with a way to judge it. And we started looking at this about 12 to 14 months out. So we had sort of 16 months of, yay, we put out this big announcement, we're really interested in this stuff, and somehow it'll happen, to 16 months later being, crap, we're 16 months down the line and we still don't know how this will happen. And surprisingly enough, an answer hasn't magically appeared out of nowhere. So we started to look at how we would judge law firms, and we realized that we couldn't just judge on stats. Actually, we had to look more substantively than that. We had to look, I say this a lot, but statistics are a photograph. So you change the light, you change the contrast, you change the filter, and you will see a different picture from the same statistics. And that is what diversity is. It's statistics and it's a snapshot, but inclusivity can't be measured in the right way. And that is inclusivity is the day-to-day boring work that people do to make their work environments more inclusive. And it's not glamorous, and it doesn't fit neatly in a PowerPoint, and you can't get tangibles out of it that impress big execs. But it is the work that makes a difference. It's the work that means that someone is going around speaking to every single partner in a law firm saying, who's in your pipeline for talent? And by the way, have you thought about that person who's a bit quieter because their cultural background means they're a bit quieter? Or did you think about that person who's a part-time carer, and so you only see them twice a week because they're not as present in your space? That's what really matters to inclusivity. Like little things, like one law firm told us that during Ramadan, they put dates out because Muslim people who are fasting break their fast, that have their iftar meal at around 6 or 7 o'clock. And if they're in the office working, they would like to break it on dates because dates are sweet and they're nice for people who are fasting. And it costs £2 to go to Sainsbury's and get a packet of dates. But that is what it takes to make a Muslim person who is fasting feel included in the office. Put the dates in the kitchen. So it's those little things that really make a difference. And we wanted to incorporate those into our process for panel law firms. So we built a report that was a mixture of stats and substance. I tested that report out with all of our law firms to make sure they were happy answering it, making sure they understood it all. And then we went ahead with it, and we got all the law firms to fill in the reports, answer questions on statistics, but also substantive questions directly related to inclusivity. And then the next stage was we had 15 reports, and we had to read those reports. And then again, we had the problem of how do you mark those reports? We didn't have an objective standard yet. We didn't know what good looked like, what bad looked like. And we also didn't know whether any of our law firms would be good or bad. I mean, we can only hope. So what we did was measure the law firms against each other. We brought in a team of reviewers who are a mixture of lawyers and non-lawyers, different levels of seniority, different diversity characteristics. We hit 14 different diversity characteristics in our review panel. No two reviewers intersectioned exactly the same in terms of their diversity characteristics, which I was really happy about. And then we gave each person 3 law firm reports to review. Each law firm was reviewed twice in 2 different peer groups. And then we just compared them. Which answer do you like more? And the sum total of that was we got a mark. Every law firm got a mark at the end that was marked twice. Law firms that made it into the top 6 were then marked a second time. They were then reviewed again by me. I reviewed every report to make sure there were no crazy outliers that people hadn't realized, just to sense check it all. Then I sent it up to our GCs to take a look at the top 3. And Sabina, who's BT's GC and sits on our ExCo, reviewed the winning report. So that's what we did. That was the process. I was quite involved.
How good were firms when they responded to you and being honest? Because I think there's probably a real desire to say we've got this sorted and we've cracked it. The reality is I'm not sure that any firm has, and it's a journey for everybody. So how good were firms at kind of trying to get really underneath what it was that you were trying to achieve, and holding their hands up and saying that we just don't have all of the answers yet?
Yeah, really good question. In truth, I have no idea. If a law firm lied to me, I don't know. I didn't know they lied. So what I can say is that first of all, in terms of the stats, we had no major outliers. So that tells me that the law firms are roughly at the same place. So we had one firm that has 50% female and male in partnership. So it's equal in its partnership. And it has always been that way. And it is a standout statistic that law firm has. But other than that, we had a range. Maybe law firms massaged their numbers a bit. Couldn't tell you. Where we really tried to focus was on the substance, because ultimately that is what makes the difference. The numbers are a byproduct of doing good work. So if I can see good work in the space, I know the numbers are going to follow. And if they don't follow, I know that the firm that is engaged in the good work will alter its work to get to the numbers. That is what ultimately I'm really interested in. So the original plan was to weight the answers in favor of the substantive questions. So potentially 60% of the marks went to that and 40% to the stats. in my little Excel spreadsheets that I put together very basically for a lawyer, tried to weight the numbers 70-30 in favor of substantive, 60-40, and then 50-50, and actually found it didn't make a difference to the marks overall, which tells me that law firms that are doing good things in terms of their substantive work are also seeing results in their statistics as well. We did have a question in our substantive questions, which is, what have you done wrong? What failed this year? I think that's one of the most important questions we can ask. Successes are boring, to be honest with you. Everyone will find something they succeed at, but really engaging with your failures and critiquing yourself and finding ways to learn from them, that's the stuff that everyone can learn from. And if you can master that, I think that is where you can really impact in your own firm, for BT in our own company. So I was really interested to see how law firms engaged with that question, and not all of them did, quite frankly. We got some of those answers. That is, what is so the type of thing you'd give in an interview where someone says, "What is your biggest weakness?" and you're like, "Oh, I work too hard." Yeah,
we read the same book.
Yeah. So we did get a couple of those, but we also did get a couple of really interesting answers from law firms. One of the ones that always stands out is around motivation. How do you motivate people in this area that this work is important? How do you get people to the workshops that you do, get people to the seminars and the lunchtime talks? How do you get people to engage and be interested in learning, especially people who are tired, who've been through a pandemic? I know we keep saying it, but we are still just on the other side of that. People who are weary, who are trying to just get on and do their jobs in quite a stressful environment. And I think that motivation is really key, because it makes me think of two things. The first is, we can't just do diversity, equity, and inclusion work. I keep saying D&I, it should be DE&I, so I apologize for that. But we can't do this work on the side. Like, we have to, and that's not to say we all have to be experts in it, but we have to build it into our day-to-day practices. So it can't be that I did 7 hours of work and then I did an hour of DE&I work. It should be, I did 8 hours of work and I incorporated DE&I into that. I thought about how I built my team. I thought about who I was hiring. I thought about who I was responding to in my email, and what is it that I need to put in to make them understand the email better, for example, if they're neurodiverse. So it's about building DE&I into our day-to-day lives. That means that it's not extra effort for people. And the other thing that it makes me think of is, we need to bring people on the journey, and we need to bring everyone on the journey. So there is I see a lot of broad talk today about people who are disenfranchised by DE&I work because they can't find themselves fitting into a diversity characteristic. The typical example is a white cisgendered man, but it doesn't have to be a white cisgendered man. Anyone who can't find the characteristic that means they've got a diversity criteria that is going to make them interesting to people, they worry about their own lives, their own careers, what is in it for them, essentially. And that's really important, because those people still make up the majority. So they have a huge part to play and a huge voice as well. And that's not to say we shouldn't continue to do the work that we're doing. I think the work's hugely important. I think diversity in our organizations is one of the most important things we can achieve. But if we can't bring everyone on the journey, if not everyone's with us, then we're not going to achieve it. You can't achieve it as a minority. You have to bring the majority with you on the journey. And so that motivation question at the moment is in my mind a lot, because I think about how are we going to get everyone engaged, and how are we going to bring everyone on the journey? And I don't have the answer to that, but watch the space. I'm going to get it.
You have kind of such a bank now of knowledge of what firms are doing, which is amazing. What are you going to do with that knowledge? I mean, is there a way that you can use that to try and showcase what firms are doing well, and I guess encouraging that collaboration across firms? Because there's this balance, isn't there? Is DEI work a competitive advantage, which it kind of almost is in the context of what we're discussing, because the firm that wins a place. But should it be something that is a competitive advantage, when really it's a kind of an industry problem that needs to be looked at more systemically?
in terms of the competitive advantage, we had a lot of discussions internally about should we be rewarding people for doing the things that we think are right? Like, where is that the way to do it? And I think for us, we want to collaborate with our law firms. We're not interested in hitting them over the head with a stick. So there are organizations out there who have done things like, if you don't have a diverse team, I'm reducing your fees by 30%, or if you are the best, I'm giving you a 30% bonus. We're not interested in that type of thing. That's not collaborative. We want to collaborate with our law firms. We can only do this work if they work with us on it. So that's the first thing. I think it has to be a journey that we're on together, because we're not perfect at BT. We haven't got it all right before, now, and in the future we won't. So we've got to work together. And if we can't do that, it's not going to succeed. And then it is a really interesting question. What are we going to do with it now? And what was the purpose of doing it in the first place? Like, why did I read 50 reports and have 10 different Excel spreadsheets and know more numbers better than I'd ever planned to? And one of our GCs, interestingly, asked me the question, what are you going to do with like a stat that says the numbers aren't right? Like, let's say a law firm has 15% in a number and you want it to be 16%. What are you going to do? And I said, I can't do anything. We can't do anything. We can't force law firms to change their makeup or look at diversity differently. And I'm also not going to sit there and nudge a law firm like an annoying person with a stick, saying, oh no, you're 0.7% down on that stat. Do something about it. That's not going to achieve anything. So we had to think really carefully about what was the purpose of it. And I think it was twofold for us. One was to shine a light on diversity and inclusion as part of the work we do, to say that it's important, so that law firms will focus on it. We are the buyer of the professional services, and we want the people who we buy from to look different. We want them to look diverse. And so we want to shine a light on that. And the other thing is, because it's good business. It's good business to have diverse teams. Diverse teams are economically and financially more successful. Research shows us they're happy teams. They're less likely to move on. So you retain corporate knowledge. Diversity of people creates more innovative and creative ideas. And especially for a company like BT, which is consistently evolving. I know it's a big old company, and it does broadband, and it does the networks, and it does the telephones. And if you ask my mum what it does the phone book still, which it doesn't. But it is actually, BT as a company wants to be in the digital age, is in the digital age. It is moving fast. It is innovative and creative. And we need our lawyers to be innovative and creative as well.
Has BT changed anything about the way that it works based on some of the things that you've been seeing law firms doing?
So one of the things that has come out is we now have this body of information of what law firms are doing that works, and generally what practices are doing. So for example, a lot of law firms have people networks, and also BT has people networks. So there are obviously networks of people from different diversity characteristics. You often have Muslim networks, Jewish networks. I say that because I'm Jewish, so that's the one that springs to mind. We also have an ethnic diversity network, Able to network, a carers network. In BT, we also have a veterans network, interestingly, because we get a lot of people who are ex-army. So that type of thing we saw in the law firms, and we're also doing in BT. We also saw that the law firms do regular touch points. So they do surveys, not just getting their annual stats on diversity, but substantive surveys on how people are feeling within the law firm, also surveys on people who leave the law firm, all these different touch points to check in. At BT, we also do that as well. So I think now we have a baseline of what good diversity and inclusion work looks like, even if we don't know what the stats should, we can argue about what the stats should be. We'll incorporate that next year into our annual report to ask for that stuff. I suppose for BT, seeing that the law firms were doing that stuff was sort of an opportunity for us to look at it and say, are we doing that stuff? And a lot of that type of stuff we are doing. BT is a huge company, so there's only so much a mid-level lawyer shouting about diversity and inclusion can achieve. Even our GCs can achieve in the legal department without having to get into the 100,000 plus people and a broader diversity program. But it's the little things that I think make the difference. I've said that before. I always champion that. And so what I was really interested in taking from the law firms were those little things that we hadn't necessarily thought about.
So I guess, and it's a big question, and we could dedicate a whole other podcast to it, but how good do you think firms are at working in diverse teams? And the reason I asked that question is because I think, I was really struck by the fact that you have been able to go into BT, you've been able to think about, well, what skills do I have from having been a litigator, and how can I use those in different ways? With law firms who are very special, you end up being very specialized in your area, working with people who are very specialized in your area. And I wonder how well lawyers work with you in innovating in teams where there are all of those different kind of backgrounds.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. I mean, law firms aren't really that diverse places yet, let's be really honest. So first of all, I think it's a struggle for them to get the diverse teams at the moment. I don't think they're succeeding in getting that. I mean, you're seeing a lot more diversity at the lower ends of law firms, so in the junior levels, but being honest, they're not coming up through the ranks. So some of the numbers we've seen have shown something like 65% female presenting people in the senior associate level and 25 to 30% at partnership. So female presenting people and women are not making that jump into the partnership. And I think at one stage, maybe 20, 30 years ago, people thought that would just happen, but it's not happening. And I think it hasn't happened. And law firms are really fairly struggling to understand why and what they need to do to create a space in which that would happen, that they can get those numbers into the partnership and be more reflective in their partnership of what their senior associate numbers look like. So I think it's a real struggle for law firms to get the diversity. I also think it's a mindset thing for people. I remember one of our GCs once saying to me, I needed to do a really urgent meeting and I needed someone to be on the call at 8 a.m. And their line manager said to me, they can't be on the call at 8 a.m. because they're going to be in the gym. And I thought, well, I've got an urgent call. You can't go to the gym. I mean, this is urgent. This is our work. And then I had to stop myself and say, I don't know if this is the only time in the week they can get to the gym, if working out is important for their mental health. For example, if they suffer from anxiety, exercise is really important to combating that. So I had to check myself and the way I think and go back and say, okay, no, that's fine. We'll do the call without that person or catch them up later because for them, it's important to get to the gym and they've made that decision. And I don't know, but I'm not sure there is enough people within law firms that are able to check themselves in that way because there isn't enough diversity overall in law firms where people are saying to other people, you have to check yourself. So I think the diversity is a real struggle for law firms for lots of complex reasons, including those. When you get past that and you're in the teams, the things that law firms really struggle with is holding positions. So they always want to dot every I and cross every T on the risk analysis. They want to tell us every risk out there and they don't want to be held accountable when that risk happens. They want to be able to sit back and say, I told you so. Not actually, I told you so, but it's not my fault this happened and I warned you that would happen. And sometimes it's just not very helpful for organizations. They're going to have to make a decision. And law firms, I've found, really struggle to help us make that decision, to be prepared to hold a line. I'm not sure why that is. I think it's partly not having the experience of seeing where that decision goes and living that decision. So you knowing that the decision has to be made in a sense, but really knowing it as opposed to just understanding that's the consequence kind of thing in your law firm, but actually seeing it, that's a real difference. And the other one is an abstract fear of professional negligence claims that if they hold a line and the line goes wrong, that we're going to sue them. I think the chances of that are very slim, 99.9% of the time, but that makes it quite difficult. And I think the more we go into gray areas like AI and Gen AI for law, the more creative solutions you need and the more law firms will struggle with that risk. And bringing in diverse teams will help them because, first of all, it checks them overall in terms of how they view things. But secondly, it gives a different wealth of knowledge about how things look. You might, in your diverse team, have many more people who have outside experience of the law, and as a result, a better understanding of what decisions need to be made and how to really be the advisor that can help make those decisions.
I could talk to you all day. It's so fascinating. And, again, lots of things going around in my head about this kind of, it's interesting, isn't it? As we step into a world which is less and less certain, it moves lawyers further from their comfort zone, and how they handle that will be really interesting to see. Thank you so much for speaking to me today. It's been brilliant. And I'm really excited to see what comes out of BT in the next few years.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute joy to speak to you. So yeah, I've absolutely loved it.
So that was Claire Rayson talking to Lexi Segal from BT. I've got Claire with me now. What really stood out for you during that conversation, Claire?
Gosh, so much. I think the two things that really sat with me after the conversation were, one, this idea of innovation. And I think we often talk about diversity, or I often talk about diversity and the benefits of diversity being linked to innovation and being linked to the benefits that having a diverse team brings. And lots of questions going around in my head around, what law firms can do to be more innovative, and whether that is actually compatible with being a lawyer. Lawyers are traditionally quite risk averse and like to follow a specific path. So that was one strong theme for me. I think the other was this idea of clients and the role that clients play in moving the dial. For me, it's so important that clients say what they are looking for when they are looking to hire a firm. But actually, I was really struck by the sensitivity with which Lexi navigates all of this, and Lexi, obviously part of a bigger piece here, but that BT aren't sitting there dictating what it is that clients need to do, but they are there saying that it is really important for them as a client to be able to have a firm who can work with them slightly differently. So a lot going around in my mind, but I think that's what kind of sat with me after the conversation.
And there were two fascinating questions that BT asked of their panel firms, which really didn't let them off the hook. And I thought that the first great question was, what are you getting wrong in terms of DE&I? And not surprisingly, they didn't necessarily, or BT didn't get straight answers from their panel firms. But I just think that's a really great and brave question to ask of a service provider. What are you getting wrong in terms of this critical issue?
I love that. And I think there needs to be more of that in this area, because I think, as firms recognize that they need to be doing better, and as firms start to get asked about what they're doing in this space, there is a real temptation to say, no, we've got it sorted, and these are the statistics, and some lovely, lovely quotes there from Lexi about statistics and how they provide a snapshot, and you can really, change the filter to make them say what you want them to say. But actually encouraging firms to be honest, to put their hands up and say, what, we don't get it all right. We try things, it doesn't always go the way we want it to go. And again, that goes back to innovation, doesn't it? How can you innovate if you don't try things and you don't fail? Because it's through our failures that we learn and we think about how we can do things differently.
And I almost felt she was implying that whilst there was an acceptance at BT that they weren't necessarily getting everything right, but they had the right motivation to make progress, that was the main insistence that they had with their panel firms, was just to say, right, what's your motivation to do these things? Is it genuine? And if it is, just keep on making the right efforts.
Yeah, and I think the story that she shares around dates in the office, I think, was a lovely one. And for me, what kind of came out from that kind of part of the conversation is that everyone has a part to play if we want to create a culture that's inclusive, where everyone feels like they can bring whatever they want to bring to work. I think sometimes we talk about bringing our whole selves to work, and might be that we want to do that, it might be that we don't, but we should feel able to bring what we want to, and it's beholden on all of us to do those little things that make such a huge difference.
That's right, Claire. And look, great conversation. Thanks ever so much for that. Really appreciated it.
Fantastic. And I think next time we are mixing things up again, because we're not going to have a guest. It is going to be you and I in conversation.
Is it really? You didn't tell me that.
Well, now you know.
Great. Well, I better quickly think about something to talk about when we're together.
Oh, well, I can't wait. And I'm sure you will have lots to say, as always.
Brilliant. Lovely to chat to you. And thanks for listening.
Lawyers Coach is brought to you by Client Talk and Hansard Coaching. If you're a lawyer and would like to take part in Lawyers Coach, please visit our website lawyercoach.co.uk for further details. And you can also join the conversation on our LinkedIn group Lawyers Coach. If there are any topics you'd like to hear us discuss, then just get in touch.